अज्ञानतिमिरन्दस्य ज्ञानाञ्जन शलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्देशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. Thank you everyone joining in. And yeah, we were running a little late today. So we're gonna start with the third and the final section of Bhagavad Gita, which is called Jnana section, Jnana Yoga largely. And I gave a little bit of introduction to it yesterday. So we'll begin our study of it right away. So 13th chapter has around 35 verses, if I'm correct. Yeah, 35 verses, but this is one of the most complicated subject matter of Bhagavad Gita, the most confusing. Sanskrit is also a little difficult. It is described by our acharyas that the Sanskrit here is what is you find in the Shruti Shastras, Upanishads, a little complicated, confusing, where the meaning doesn't look like straightforward. That's this particular chapter. So fine. But we have Prabhupada's purports and translations, so that's why it becomes a little understandable. Okay. Chapter 13, text number 1 and 2. Now Arjuna asks a question. Arjuna vacha prakritim purusham chaiva kshetram kshetrajna eva cha etad veditum ichchami jnanam meyam cha keshava. Shri Bhagavan vacha idam shariram kaunteya kshetram iti vidiyate etat yo veti tam prahu kshetrajna iti tat vidaha. Translation. Arjuna said, "Oh my dear Krishna, I wish to know about Prakriti. Kshetrajna. Prakritim Purusham." So Arjuna is asking asking 6 questions. And that is what this whole chapter is all about. So what are the 6 questions? Prakriti, Purushaha, Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Jnana, Neyam. So Prakriti is this material nature. Purusha is the enjoyer. Kshetra, the field, knower of the field. Kshetra is a field. Well, Krishna will answer. So what Kshetra means? Okay, we can just quickly give the answer also here. So Prakriti refers to this material nature. Purusha refers to the Supreme Personality Godhead. It's very interesting when you talk about Prakriti and Purusha. And I particularly love this chapter. It very clearly answers who is the controller here. Are we the enjoyer or not? So in Sanskrit, we have 2 things called Prakriti and Purusha. You can consider Prabhupada in the introduction, right, when talking about Purusha and Prakriti. Prakriti is a wife and Purusha is a husband. So Prabhupada gives an example, just like wife is subordinate or dependent on husband. Like this, Prakriti is always dependent on Purusha. Now question comes, we're talking about Prakriti and Purusha, who you and I are. I am a male, so am I Purusha? And I see some ladies there or some others here. So they are Prakriti? No, that's not the understanding. There is only one Purusha, that is called as Bhagavan. Everyone else is Prakriti. And what is our reference for that? 7th chapter, verse number 4 and 5, where Krishna says, I have two energies, inferior and superior energy. Aparyam itastu anyam prakritim vidhi prakritim vidhi me param. Sorry, I just messed up the verse. 7.5. Aparyam itastu anyam prakritim vidhi me param Jiva Bhutam Mahabhao. Yeah, Jiva Bhutam Mahabhao. Yayedam Dharyate Jagat. Krishna speaks about it. Prakritim Vidhi Me Param. There is Prakritim. There is one more Prakriti, which is greater than the previous Prakriti, which is discussed in the 7.4. Bhumirapo Nalavayu Khamanavudare, which Ahankarityam Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada. Prakriti. So earth, water, fire, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego, prakriti. Then Krishna says in 7.5, aparyam itastu anyam. There is something else, which is param, which is superior to the prakriti which I have described. And what is that prakriti? Jiva bhutam mahabhav. That prakriti is called as jiva bhutam yayedam dharyate jagat. So like that. So all of us are prakriti and Krishna, Supreme Personality Goddess Purusha. So that would be answered here in this particular chapter. So Vivekananda said, oh, these Vaishnavas, and they said Krishna is Purusha. Huh, I am also Purusha. I am not Prakriti. So I reject God. That is what this Arya Samajis and all these people, that's their whole philosophy about it. So we'll discuss this chapter. So this is a chapter which is a technical, but here comes a concept which addresses this basic fallacies that we have. Why a person, despite being a Prakriti, claims or wants to be Purusha. Purusha means of Purusha and Prakriti. All right? This is what thing is here like that. You need to check it online if it is coming or not coming. Because it's saying still preparing live stream. It is just not going only. You can check it out. I don't know why YouTube is not working for me here. But anyways, you can check it out. Chal right? Okay. Kshetra, Kshetrajna. Kshetra refers the place of action. That is Kshetra. And Kshetrajna refers to the knower of the place of action. Or you can say the performer, in other words. Etad Vedutam Ichchami, I want to know about this subject matter. Also, Jnanam, Gneyam, Chakeshava. Jnanam, what is knowledge? And Gneyam, what is the object of knowledge? So, who is the object of knowledge? Krishna. What is Jnanam? To know all this, what Arjuna is asking here. We'll see that. That's the point here. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, then Krishna says, Imam Shariram Kanteya Kshetram iti abhidhiyate. Arjuna, the Sharir is a field of action that is called as Kshetra. I guess I'll go with a little Sanskrit here so you'll find it easy. Other go with translation, you'll miss out what's happening. Field of action, object of knowledge, So Kshetra is the place of action, and Krishna says Shariram Kanteya Kshetram iti abhidhiyate. So body is the field of action. Etad yoveti tam prahur Kshetrajna iti tadvidaha. There is not one, there are two Kshetrajnas. Who is Kshetrajna? Etad yoveti tam prahu. One who knows the Kshetra is the Kshetrajna. Knower. Iti tadvidaha. उस प्रकार से कहा गया है. All right. We can take a look at the puppet. So this is what the purport is. I've already kind of summarized this to you all. This is what Purport says, Purush Kshetra, the owner is distinctly Kshetrajna. I am happy. All that is being described here. We'll come forward. We can just read the last paragraph of this purport. Okay, I'll start reading it and then I can ask all of you who would like to read, you can read it. So reading the second paragraph of the purport. In the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, the knower of the body, living entity, the position by which he can understand the Supreme Lord are described. In the middle 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality Godhead and the relationship between him and the Super Soul in regard to devotion service are described. The superior position of the Supreme Personality Godhead and the subordinate position of the individual soul are definitely defined in these chapters. In the first 12 chapters, that has been described like this. The living entities are subordinating under all circumstances, but in their forgetfulness, they are suffering. When enlightened by pious activities, they approach the Supreme Lord in different capacities. as the Artho Athati Jigyasu Jnani. That is also described. Now, starting with the 13th chapter, how the living entity comes in contact with material nature, how he is delivered by the Supreme Lord through the different methods of fruitive activities, cultivation of knowledge. Hari bol. Sorry, yeah, sound is low still. Yeah, sound is low. Let me just see what to do. मुझे भी लग रहा है sound का कुछ गड़बड़ चल रहा है. Hare Krishna. Is okay now? I really have to hold the mic.
Hello? Yes, it is clear, Prabhuji.
Okay, so I'll put it here. Somewhere. Hare Krishna. अभी ठीक आ रहा है?
Hare Krishna. Prabhuji, it is clear.
Okay, clear. What was I saying? By different methods of fruitive activities, cultivation of knowledge, discharge of devotional service, I explained. Although the living entity is completely different from the metal body, he somehow becomes related. This also is explained like that. So, 13th chapter, another thing which is described about it, that this 13th chapter discusses about the subject matter, which are the main subject matter of our Shruti Shastras, of Upanishads. So the about Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Purusha, Prakriti, Jnanam, Neo. These are these six are the most important subject matter of our Vedic study, which here Arjuna have asked. And where is the difficulty comes? Okay, let's again take a look at the six things. Purush Prakriti, we'll talk about it. Kshetra and Kshetrajna, where does the challenge arises and where does the Mayavadis and different kind of people get confused? Well, they want to get confused. What can happen? They will find some confusion here and there. So Kshetrajna, Kshetrajna. So Kshetra is a field of activity like body. Kshetrajna is the soul, knower of the body. But what they fail to understand, and what we'll see here through the purpose, through this chapter, purpose here is, there is not one Kshetrajna. There are two Kshetrajnas. One is Atma, second is Paramatma. Because they say, no, Kshetrajna, I am the only Kshetrajna. I am the knower. So what is their understanding? I am the Purusha and this body becomes the Prakriti. Which means this material world becomes the Prakriti. Which means this becomes a source of my enjoyment. Like that, there. So therefore, this chapter, when Jnanam and Gneyam is being asked, so there, this chapter actually does not speak about Bhagwan at all. This chapter, this technical subject will talk about Super Soul. So who is Purusha? Super Soul. Who is the object of knowledge? Super Soul. What we should learn about is Super Soul. So this technical subject matter primarily distinguishes or differentiate between Atma and Paramatma. Therefore, this becomes a very technical subject matter. Okay, let's take a look at it. Okay, let me give you one analogy and then we'll take a look at Prabhupada, who definitely would speak in his purpose. How there are two living entities, or what is the difference between Atma and Paramatma? Srila Prabhupada explains as follows. Prabhupada says there is a, just like a farmer, he has a land, which is a field of action for him. Farmer is the knower of his land. Farmer is acknowledging it, right? So, however, the farmer knows only about his land, not about all the lands. But the king knows about all the lands. So a farmer is soul and king is Paramatma. Kshetrajna. There are two Kshetrajnas. Yes, it always exists in the society. That is how Prabhupada explains there are two Kshetrajnas. Now let's take a look at it. Text number 3. अभी यहाँ से हम सारा पपट पढ़ेंगे. क्षेत्रज्ञानं चापि मां विद्धि सर्वक्षेत्रेषु भारत क्षेत्रक्षेत्राग्नयो ज्ञानं यत् ज्ञानं मतं मम. O Partha, you should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies. And to understand this body and its knower is called knowledge. That is my opinion. So what is Jnanam? Jnanam, knowledge. What is knowledge? To understand Atma and Paramatma is knowledge. That is what Krishna says. Yatta jnanam matam mama. And this is my opinion, like that. Kshetrajnam. We'll do this analysis of Sanskrit in our detailed study. Let's not go too much detail. Okay, let's read the purport. Oh, Koranga, there are going to be big purports here. Okay. Ravi Prabhu, you start with it. You're sitting with the mic, so we'll get to hear properly, probably.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Purport, while discussing the subject of the body and the knower of the body, the soul and the super soul, we shall find three different topics of study: the Lord, the living entity, and matter. In every field of activities, in every body, there are two souls: the individual soul and the super soul. Because the super soul is the plenary expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Krishna says, I am also the knower, but I am not the individual knower of the body. I am the super knower. I am present in every body as the Paramatma or super soul. One who studies the subject matter of the field of activity and the knower of the field very minutely in terms of this Bhagavad Gita can attain to knowledge.
All
The
right.
Lord says,
So this is where our understanding begins. That there are two: soul, Atma, and Paramatma. And this is where, when people do technical study of this Bhagavad Gita, based on their understanding of Sanskrit, they fail to understand there are two. For a second, let's take a look at the Sanskrit. For a second. Kshetrajnam means Kshetrajna, the knower. Cha api mam vidhi. Kshetrajna, certainly ma means me, vidhi know. Sarva kshetreshu bharataha, knows all the fields. Kshetra kshetrajno. Kshetra means the field of activity. Kshetrajna, the knower of the field. Jnanam, this is called as knowledge. Yat taj, that which is jnanam, knowledge, matam mama. I mean, of course, it's very a little tricky for me to explain in a short while. But if you take a look at the Sanskrit, you don't find anywhere any word which speaks about Atma and Paramatma. You see that? Now, but if we carefully study, there is a hint given that there is Atma and Paramatma. How it is given? As Prabhupada is explaining the purport, as we give an example, as Prabhupada's example only, a farmer, he knows only about his land. But there is somebody else who knows about all the lands, right? Now let's take a look at the first line again. Kshetrajna chapi mavidhi. The knower of the field, sarva kshetreshu bharata. Sarva kshetreshu knows about all the fields, not one field. So kshetrage chapi mavidhi. So mavidhi, what they say is, the knower knows about his field. Sarva kshetreshu, and knows about all the fields. This is where they say, see, we know about everything. We are one with God. No, the subtlety here is soul and Paramatma, the farmer and the king. That is how this is beginning. And this discussion we have had in the second chapter, where Prabhupada quotes various examples from Padma Purana and various places, how there are two birds sitting in one tree, one bird is a Paramatma, one bird is a Paramatma, which is an observer, while other bird is trying to enjoy, like that. So that is where the difference of understanding comes, where people fail to understand it. Now please read the purport. Continue, Ravi Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
the Lord says, I am the knower of the field of activities in every individual body. The individual may be the knower of his own body, but he is not in knowledge of other bodies. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is present as the Super Soul in all bodies, knows everything about all bodies. He knows all the different bodies of all the various species of life.
All right. So point we have discussed, Prabhupada is giving example. Go to the next paragraph. The body consists of the senses. What happened, Ravi Prabhu?
The body consists of the senses. The Supreme Lord is Rishikesh, which means the controller of the senses. He is the original controller of the senses, just as the king is the original controller of all activities of the state. The citizens are secondary controllers. The Lord says, I am also the knower. This means that he is the super knower. The individual soul knows only his particular body. In the Vedic literature, it is stated as follows: Shitrani Sharirani Bijam Chapi Shubha Shubhe Tani Vetti Sa Yogatma Tata Kshetragnya Uchate. This body is called the Kshetra, and within it dwells the owner of the body and the Supreme Lord, who knows both the body and the owner of the body. Therefore, he is called the knower of all fields. The distinction between the field of activities, the knower of activities, and the supreme knower of activities is described as follows: perfect knowledge of the constitution of the body, the constitution of the individual soul, and the constitution of the super soul is known in terms of Vedic literature as Jnana. That is the opinion of Krishna. To understand both the soul and the super soul as one yet distinct is knowledge. One who does not understand the field of activity and the knower of activity is not in perfect knowledge. One has to understand the position of Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer of nature, and Ishvara, the knower of who dominates or controls nature and the individual soul. One should not confuse the three in their different capacities. One should not confuse the painter, the painting, and the easel. This material world, which is the field of activities, is nature, and the enjoyer of nature is the living entity, and above them both is the supreme controller, the personality of Godhead. It is stated in Vedic knowledge, language in the Shvetashvatra Upanishad 1.12, Bhokta Bhogyam Preritaram Cha Matva Sarvam Proktam Trividam Brahman Etat. There are three Brahma conceptions. Prakriti is Brahman as the field of activities, and the Jiva, individual soul, is also Brahman and is trying to control material nature. And the controller of both of them is also Brahman, but he is the factual controller.
Continue.
In this chapter, it will also be explained that out of the two knowers, one is fallible and the other is infallible. One is superior and the other is subordinate. One who understands the two knowers of the field to be one and the same contradicts the supreme personality of Godhead, who states here very clearly, I am also the knower of the field of activity. One who misunderstands a rope to be a serpent is not in knowledge. There are different kinds of bodies and there are different owners of the bodies. Because each individual soul has its individual capacity for lording it over material nature, there are different bodies, but the Supreme also is present in them as this controller. The word Cha is significant, for it indicates the total number of bodies. That is the opinion of Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan. Krishna is the super soul present in each and every body apart from the individual soul. And Krishna explicitly says here that real knowledge is to know that the super soul is the controller of both the field of activities and the finite enjoyer. Hare Krishna.
So Kshetra is the field of action, soul is Kshetragya, and in this verse Krishna says Kshetragyam Chapi Mam Vidhi. I am also Kshetragya. But what is the difference? Sarva Kshetreshu Bharata. However, I know about all the Kshetras, about all the bodies like that. But those who confuse that both the Kshetragyas are one, they are contradicting. That's the point the subject matter establishes. Text number 4. Tashetram yacha yadrakcha yat vikari yatascha yat sachayo yat prabhavascha tat samasena me shunu. Now please hear my brief description of this field of activity and how it is constituted, what its changes are, whence it is produced, who that knower of the field of activity is, and what its influences are. So there are 24 elements of which this field is created of. That is what is going to be discussed now. This is called as an analytical study of Sankhya. The nature of field. Mother Induratika, go ahead. Purport.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. The Lord is describing the field of activities and the knower of the field of activities in their constitutional positions. One has to know how this body is constituted, the materials of which this body is made, under whose control this body is working, how the changes are taking place, where from the changes are coming, what the causes are, what the reasons are, what the ultimate goal of the individual is, and what the actual form of the individual soul is. One should also know the distinction between the individual living soul and the super soul, their different influences, their potentials, etc. One just has to understand this Bhagavad Gita directly from the description given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and all this will be clarified. One should be careful not to consider the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everybody to be one with the individual soul, the Jiva. This is something like equating the potent and the impotent.
Text number 5, where field is described now. Rishibhi Bahuda Gitam Chandobhi Vivide Pratak Brahma Sutra Padhe Chaiva Hetu Madhe Vinishchitehi. That knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower of activities is described by various sages in various Vedic writings. It is especially presented in Vedanta Sutra with all reasoning as to cause and effect. Mother Medhavni, you can read the purport.
Krishna is the highest authority. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the highest authority in explaining this knowledge. Still, as a matter of course, learned scholars and standard authorities always give evidence from previous authorities. Krishna is explaining this most controversial point regarding the duality and non-duality of the soul and the supersoul by referring to a scripture, the Vedanta, which is accepted as authority. First, he says this is according to different sages. As far as the sages are concerned, besides himself, Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra, is a great sage. And in the Vedanta Sutra, duality is perfectly explained. And Vyasadeva's father...
Yeah. I forgot to go back to the verse, so you'll understand what's going on here. Scroll up. So here, Lord Shri Krishna is making a point, as Srila Prabhupada had in a purport, so you can understand that. Now, Krishna is saying, is giving references according to Rishi Bahuda Gita, according to the sages, that is Smriti Shastras, then Chandobhir Vividhe Pratak, that is Shruti Shastras, by Vedic hymns. And then Brahma Sutra Padeshchaiva, even by Brahma Sutra, which means Vedanta. Hetum Adibhir Vinishchitehe. All of them, or all of this, Shruti, Smriti, Nyaya, all of these have explained the difference between the cause and effect. So therefore it is said, this chapter is the essence of all the Shruti. Or you can say for that reason, all the Shastra, Shruti, Smriti and Nyaya. And these are the 6 prominent questions which are asked there. That's the point I wanted to bring in. And that's the reason Prabhupada is quoting Vedanta and then Srila Vyasa. Continue, Mother.
Hare Krishna.
Very good. Start.
Purport Vishnu Prabhupada ki jai. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Okay. As far as the sages are concerned, besides himself, Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra, is a great sage. And in the Vedanta Sutra, duality is perfectly explained. And Vyasadeva's father, Parashara, is also a great sage. And he writes in his books of religiosity, Aham Tvam Cha Tathanye. We, you, I, and the various other living entities are all transcendental, although in material bodies. Now we are fallen into the ways of the 3 modes of material nature according to our different karma. As such, some are on higher levels and some are in the lower nature. The higher and lower natures exist due to ignorance and are being manifested in an infinite number of living entities. But the super soul, which is infallible, is uncontaminated by the 3 qualities of nature and is transcendental. Similarly, in the original Vedas, a distinction between the soul, the super soul, and the body is made, especially in the Katha Upanishad. There are many great sages who have explained this, and Parashara is considered principal among them. The word Chandobihi refers to the various Vedic literatures. The Tattatriya Upanishad, for example, which is a branch of the Yajur Veda, describes nature, the living entity, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As stated before, Kshetra is the field of activities, and there are 2 kinds of Kshetrajna, the individual living entity and the supreme living entity. As stated in the Tattaittiriya Upanishad 2.5, Brahma Pucham Pratishtha, there is a manifestation of the Supreme Lord's energy known as Annamaya, dependence upon food for existence. This is a materialistic realization of the Supreme. Then in Pranamaya, After realizing the supreme absolute truth in food, one can realize the absolute truth in the living symptoms or life forms.
So,
In Jnana,
yeah, just 1 second, mother. So this is itself is a very profound subject matter, which is actually part of this Taittiriya Upanishad, which talks about 5 levels of consciousness. This is something worth studying. This is something which I also want to. I have did some study in this, but I need to do more elaborately. To tell you what is written here, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization called as Brahma Pucham. Out of this, the first 3 anamaya. So there is just like we have at the physical realm, there are different energy centers, what we call as chakra, Mooladhara, like that up to Agni Chakra. So certain yogic traditions like or paths like what we call as Kundalini Yoga or we call a Hatha Yoga is more or less same in terms of the practice, the philosophy. They make their evolution of consciousness through moving their energy and stabilizing these different energy centers. Subtly behind all this is the changes where the changes have to be brought about is in the consciousness. So this particular subject matter, this is a subject of great science, tremendous science, and this is where actually a thorough research. But you can have that thing, so we can see that the name is given. In case somebody is seeing this for the first time, you can just highlight those anamaya, pranamaya, the line. Yeah, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization. That particular point. So what was I saying? So what is happening behind all what we are doing? Where this change is happening is in our levels of consciousness. Now this is not perceptible. It is perceptible one who knows this science, but for a layman he cannot. For example, if a friend of yours meets you after 10 years, he will say you have changed physically. That is perceptible. But this levels of consciousness is what we move forward to through the yogic practice. Anamoy, Manamoy, Anamoy, Pranamoy, Jnanamoy. Pranamoy is also called as Jnanamoy or Manamoy, if I'm correct. Like this. Actually, no. Anamoy, Manamoy, Pranamoy, Manamoy, Jnanamoy, and Vijnana. Vijnana is the 5th, this thing. So, Anamaya consciousness is by default is seen in the kids. Anamaya consciousness, Ana. जिनको सिर्फ खाने के अलावा कुछ और नहीं सोचता. That is Ana. For example, a child, so this is as your age progresses, this also level of consciousness also changes. That's the reason we say we have grown up. Grown up in what? Grown up in consciousness. Your consciousness is not what it was before. So Anamaya consciousness is up to the age of 7 years, 5 to 7 years. For example, you've seen a child moving around, does nothing but puts everything in the mouth. Puts everything, just thinks and knows only about eating. That is called as Anamaya consciousness. Then a Pranamaya consciousness, I may be a little off the flow, the sequence. I'm giving some high level. Don't quote me, I'll come back to you and in one of the sessions in the future, we'll talk about this. I love this subject matter. Pranamaya is something where you become, not Pranamaya, it's probably Manamaya, I believe. No, that's not the sequence. That's wrong sequence. That's not given sequence. Prabhupada only written 4 here. So I believe the next is a Manamaya, where you become karke. That is Vijnana, Ananda is the same thing. Karke. So anyways, karke. So your prana or Manamaya, whatever it is, the next level is about where you become conscious of your surroundings. Now where you want to have relationship. Your mind use engagement like that. That's how this levels of consciousness moves you. But at max, in our conditioned life, we can go up to this Manamaya consciousness. If you want to go to Jnana, Vijnana, Jnanamaya consciousness means some knowledge of this world, some awareness. Yet we don't have knowledge of the soul. So we cannot, even the most educated person, even the Elon Musk, his level of consciousness is up to Manamaya, Pranamaya, or to some extent Jnanamaya. Vijnana and Anandamaya, that is out of question. That happens for those who practice yoga. That is what is being talked about. Bear with me. didn't give the good presentation on this. I'll come back to you on this. This is a very fantastic subject matter. Prabhupada in his writings do not speak much about it. We have to go back in Taittiriya. I have this particular section from Taittiriya Upanishad. I'll read back and come back to you. Please read, Mother. And this is how the individual's growth happens. So this is technically what is happening within us by the practice of yoga. Our level of consciousness should be evolving. So what we talk about pure devotee, that is Anandamaya consciousness. What is a pure devotee? He is always situated in trance. He doesn't know that is the level of consciousness. And then we shuffle between jnana and vijnana, we get some realization like that. Those are the things here. Please go ahead, Mother.
In Jnanamaya, realization extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. Then there is Brahman realization called Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. The next and supreme stage is Anandamaya realization of the all blissful nature. Thus, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization, which are called Brahma Pucham. Out of these, the first 3, Annamaya, Pranamaya, and Jnanamaya, involve the fields of activities of the living entities. Transcendental to all these fields of activities is the Supreme Lord, who is called Anandamaya. The Vedanta Sutra also describes the Supreme by saying, Anandamayo Abhyasat. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is by nature full of joy. To enjoy his transcendental bliss, he expands into Vijnanamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, and Annamaya. In the field of activities, the living entity is considered to be the enjoyer, and different from him is the Anandamaya. That means that if the living entity decides to enjoy in dovetailing himself with the Anandamaya, then he becomes perfect. This is the real picture of the Supreme Lord as the supreme knower of the field, the living entity as the subordinate knower, and the nature of the field of activities. One has to search for this truth in the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra. It is mentioned here that the codes of the Brahma Sutra are very nicely arranged according to cause and effect. Some of the sutras or aphorisms are Na Vyat Ashrutehe 2.3.2, Natma Shrutehe 2.3.18, and Parat Tu Tat Shrutehe 2.3.40. The first aphorism indicates the field of activities, the second indicates the living entity, and the third indicates the Supreme Lord, the summum bonum among all the manifestations of various entities. Thank you, Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. And the 6th and 7th verse talks about the 24 elements. What is the Kshetra constitutes of? That we shall see tomorrow. And then after that, 8 to 12, the 4 verses, in fact 5 verses, talks about knowledge. What is knowledge? And this is a very famous section where 20 items of knowledge are being discussed. That is what Prabhupada says. This comprises of complete knowledge, like that. So knowledge is not only about knowing. Knowledge is also about action. So our behavior. So we'll see that. And then after that, the subject matter would be about Niyam, which is briefly discussed here, and then the discussion from 13th verse onward will start for Purusha and Prakriti, like that. So we'll see that discussion next time, and then probably I'll just a little bit go back and refer to my notes from Taittiriya Upanishad. It's been a long time. So it looks like Pranamaya is only called as Manamaya, but why do I remember there were 2 distinctive stages? I'll take a look at it again. But here Prabhupada writes there are 5, Anamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, Vijnanamaya, and Anandamaya. So I'll take a look at what this is mentioned here. We'll come back on that tomorrow. To conclude with what we saw today, just this particular chapter is a very, very important chapter. There are 6 fundamental questions which are the subject matters of Vedanta study, that is Purusha, Prakriti, Jnanam, Niyam, Kshetra, Kshetrajna. And all the mental speculation happens around this subject matter. Who is Purusha, who is Prakriti? What is Jnanam, what is Niyam, what is Kshetra, what is Kshetrajna? And here Lord Shri Krishna makes it very clear. One Kshetrajna is sitting in the body, that is Atma, who however knows only about that body. But Sarva Kshetreshu, Krishna says, but there is another Kshetrajna, that is I, who knows about all the field of actions, and that is Super Soul. Like that, and along with that, we also saw Prabhupada talking about this, the 5 levels of consciousness. In other words, if you see, there are so many things for us to understand and to learn. And what Srila Prabhupada has given us a simple, straightforward solution. If you do that, if we just faithfully follow what Prabhupada has said, we'll get the desired results. We don't have to go through a mental exercise. पहले मैं सब समझूंगा, फिर मेरा विश्वास बनेगा, फिर मैं पालन करूंगा. तब तक आप 90 साल के हो जाओगे, शायद गले से आवाज भी नहीं निकलेगी. So chanting of Hare Krishna Mahamantra, 16 rounds minimum should start immediately. I know all of you are already doing it, but for those who are not, we should not wait for it. With that, we'll pause here. Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada